I asked more than 300 readers like you which was the best book they read this year so far. What I didn't know is that I would get hundreds and hundreds of book recommendations, so I spent hours sorting and categorizing these books, getting a total of 157 different books and a top 10 list that I hope both surprises and inspires you. In the top 10 we have a fantasy standalone that I've only heard good things about. It's been in my personal TBR for I guess years, and what I heard about this book is that it not only touches you because it is beautifully written, but also the emotional impact that it has is outstanding. It's famous because the way in which the prose flows, it's wonderful. You go from one character to another, and it has a beautiful blend of a POV telling a story, but then you go deep beneath and you have this theater and you have a story within a story that it's making really the delights of a lot of readers, and that is The Spear Cuts Through Water. This seems to not be only a wonderful book cover, but also a story that feels more like a quest. We will be following this god that is making this escape, and there's a war that it's about to be unfolding. The sons of this god are chasing her, and this will allow us to have this almost quest feeling where there's going to be this good blend of character and plot-driven story, leaning more towards that character-driven side that I always love. I will personally read it as soon as I can. Position number 9, we have a story that it's gaining so much momentum lately. This is mainly, I guess, due to great booktubers loving and pitching this story non-stop over these last 6 months. So there's a little bit of recency in this list that you can see, but this is a sci-fi epic story that it's becoming one of the favorites of a lot of people, and that is the Sun Eater series. Specifically, lots of people mentioned the Disquiet Gods, which is book 6 in the saga, and it was released just a few months ago. I've only read first book, so I cannot really pitch the story as a whole, but a lot of people are mentioning it, not only because it is epic and it is dark and it is greedy and it is beautifully written, but because the stakes are so incredibly high, and it is just this beautiful blend of politics but also action, and there's a lot of just falling in love with the character and how he is struggling and how he is a human but it's so flawed, and how he is becoming a monster. Let me know down below in the comments if you've also picked this book and if you've loved it or not. In position number 8, we have a story that personally, it's the one that has surprised me the most, because what I heard about this book was really polarizing. It's written by an author that it's really loved within the young adult sphere, but this was her adult debut, and a lot of people were saying that the story was somewhat similar to something that you've read before, that the tropes did not feel unique. However, the people that were really pitching this were saying that it's a story that really blends beautifully characters that are very intense and that you really want to fall in love with them, but also a plot that is to die for. And it also has this emotionally touched story, and that is Swordcatcher by Cassandra Clare. This is the same author as the Shadowhunters universe, and as you can imagine, she is personally not my favorite author, and I always hate from her that she usually leans towards the miscommunication trope with the characters, which I absolutely despise. However, I've heard that in this book we won't have that, and in here what we have at its core is a story of these two different POVs. In one of them we have this character that he is to be kind of like the savior of the prince, and in the other we will have this girl that has access to magic. One thing goes wrong and they will be thrown together to solve this mystery that it's supposed to be unraveling really fast, and it's supposed to be fun and quite addictive. Let me know again if you've read it. Position number 7, we have one of my favorite fantasy stories of all time, and I'm just head over heels that it is here. It was really popular in booktube a few years ago, and I guess I'm not hearing it as much lately, but this continues to be a story that a lot of people, readers like you, are discovering and loving. I wager it is a story that feels hard to get into, but very easily you will fall in love with it. It feels historical, but it's also really slow, very character driven, incredibly political and strategic, and it is so wonderful. I really recommend for everyone, and that is The Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu. Lots of people mentioned Grace of Kings, which is the first book, but also it was mentioned book 2 to book 4, which usually book 2, I guess, it's what it's considered the best one. This story took me in a moment moment in which I didn't believe that I was gonna be able to really read it and fell in love as hard as I was. I read book 1 and 2 already, and they feel really different. Book 1 tells this story that it feels like a history book. In every chapter, which are incredibly short, it's telling you a story that it's important in this political environment that you're following. And it's so easy to just keep reading because the chapters are so short and everything has a punch. Something terrible is happening at each chapter. It is less onto the character driven side, because although we will be following them, you won't have that window into their minds, into their feelings. That quickly changes into book 2, because the writing style changes into a more cohesive story where less stuff happens time-wise, but we will be able to see how these characters are evolving, and they are really trying to survive in this massive war that we are seeing unfolding through different generations. It is fascinating. I just really recommend you to start picking this up. If you are not in the mood, just leave it, because it's a story that you really would like to savor, and it is wonderful. One of my favorites, 100% recommend. Position number 6, we have a story that I started reading last year, and it was such a delightful surprise. I thought I was not going to be loving this story, and turned out I fell in love absolutely with it. It has this wonderful blend of classic fantasy with a modern touch that it is just so phenomenal. It made me remember why I love to read fantasy. It has this good versus evil, this quest, these different friends that need to figure their space, and it's so good. The different characters are playing this role, and fate is after them, and you see this element of they are trying to fight their fate, and they don't really know who they are becoming, and you're seeing it and you're really like, please help. And that is The Faithful and the Fallen by John Wayne. So lots of people mentioned Malice and also Wrath from this series as well. I just read book 1, but this is definitely the gentle push that I needed in order to continue. Readers, like you mentioned, that it took them by surprise because it was very addictive. The prose, everything was so easy to get into. The prose started in the lower side, but then really quickly went to a very fast pace, which it just always makes for a very addictive story. It has the best tropes of fantasy, and I can really recommend, regardless of where you are in your reading fantasy journey. Position number 5, and I bet you're going to be surprised that this is here. We have a story that it's incredibly popular. However, it is not in the top 1. It is from one of the most popular fantasy authors that we have. And although it is not a new story, I am still really happy that people are still reading this series and that they are loving it so hard, because it's my favorite. And that is Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. Lots of people mentioned that they are reading Way of Kings, but more Words of Radiance, which is book 2. There was a mention of Rhythm of War, which is the last book 4 that we have. It's this amazing story where the writing style, it's quite accessible. Brandon Sanderson always makes his stories to be really enticing, really easy to get them. But this one, it's, I guess, more layered. You will have the flora, the fauna, different politics, different societies. You will have a profound depiction of mental illnesses displayed in our core characters, and those characters might be able to touch on magic, and part of the reason they're able to get there, it's because they are slightly broken, and I think that's a beautiful way of depicting people and depicting magic. It just is, it has an amazing world building where we will have these different rules of the Cosmere. And although I don't usually recommend starting with the Stormlight Archive because it is really Cosmere aware, if you've already read Mistborn, please get into this one. It is a wonderful story that really makes you feel for the characters. I don't believe I've ever loved characters as much as I love the ones that we see here. There's an incredible magic system. Stakes are very high, and you have the Sounderlanches, which is so typical of this author, and in this series it shines. So the ending of each of every of these books, it's absolutely outstanding. You will feel like you want to clap, that you want to laugh, that you want to cry. It's just such an emotional story. Position number 4, we have a story that leans more towards the funny, really adventurous, but nonetheless really makes you think kind of story. It is a really action-packed and leans more towards the plot side because it's non-stop. The pacing, it's incredibly fast, but the characters are surprisingly profound. So much stuff to unpack from this story, where we not only follow this man that it is very likable, but we also follow a sentient cat. And yes, I'm talking about Dungeon Crawler Carl. But suddenly something happens to the world and everyone dies. Most of us die. And then the world kind of like collapses and it just turns upside down. And the ones that remain will need to play in these Hunger Games that are televised, and the bad ones are aliens. So this is so new, so bizarre, but it really, really works. It's absolutely funny. It is so easy to get to it. The humor is really on point, but then you will also touch on scenes that are really, really hard because society is dying and this is being televised. Humor, but it leans more towards the darker side. I loved it. Absolutely addictive. Position number 3, we have a story that shines because it's very emotional. The stakes are incredibly high. There are a lot of twists and turns. It is so very well done. It leans more towards the character-driven side, but really, really the plot, it's so outstanding. It feels so different. And although it also leans more towards the sci-fi side, it is really taking the heart of a lot of fantasy readers, and that is Red Rising by Pierce Brown. Lots of people mentioned book 2, book 3, also Lightbringer, which was the last book that was released. And this story shines, in my opinion, because the world building and the premise, it's so fascinating. We have this society that it's layered and they are differentiated based on colors. At the lowest side we have the red ones, and then at the top we have the golden ones, and we will have one from the bottom trying to infiltrate at the top and trying to break the society. This is a Roman Empire inspired story that takes place on space, so it is a bizarre combination that really, really works. If you just read the beginning, you will feel already a lot of emotions, and I think this is what Pierce Brown does best, which is taking characters that are living through very complex situations and layering out their emotions for you to really feel them. It is a story that will take you and you won't be able to really breathe until you've read it. So it is also really addictive, and it is a very good story that I cannot recommend more. Position number 2, I have one of the biggest surprises of this list. Pleasantly surprised though that it is here. It's a story that leans more towards the cozy mystery side, but there's also this point of humor, and there's all in all this world building that it's unique. It follows this, we need to figure out what is happening, this murder, but along the way there's these very incredible dangerous creatures that might come up and kill all of us. So these two characters need to team up, and they are so different. One of them is just like brilliant but zero social skills, and the other one is just like more skilled but it's just younger, and it is a wonderful blend. I was cackling out loud and really, really enjoying the mystery side of it, and that is The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. This author wrote the Founders trilogy, which is also one of my favorites. A lot of things that shined in that trilogy also shine here, in my opinion. We have these misfit characters that are teaming up, and they're just so charming to follow, but also they feel so relatable. Like their concerns are so relatable, and I just love it because of that. The prose flows really easy, and there's always these high stakes, this plot that keeps advancing. I said the pacing is medium. It is not a heist, but you will feel that every time something is happening, and every chapter kind of ends with a mini cliffhanger, which I guess it's really, really easy for you to keep reading. I devoured these in just one weekend. Loved it. Also, the world building, the idea of having this magic around plants and around everything that is revolving feels so interesting, and I really, really recommend if you want something that feels easy to read but has this cozy mystery, these very charismatic characters, and the best humor that you can take. Position number 1, we have a story that was my favorite read of last year. So I'm just so happy that readers that enjoy fantasy and they have picked up this book are stating that this book was one of their favorite, if not the best for them this year. It was mentioned time and time and time again, and it makes for such a great story. The world building, it's great. We will also have this Roman Empire setting. The magic, it's stated in a way that feels really unique because we will have this pyramid, and at the top people can channel power because of the people that are in the layer below them. So they kind of need to take care of that people, because if they die, bad things happen to them. So there's this concept fairly similar to Red Rising, where we will have someone that it's kind of faking that he belongs to those at the top, infiltrating this school, trying to figure out what is happening. So it does have this military academic setting, which I absolutely love. There are these incredible scenes. The characters are so compelling, and just you see what is happening, and it is mind-blowing. The end, it is so outstanding, and it will get you down the rabbit hole of figuring out what happens. It has a major cliffhanger, so just be aware of that, but it is so worth it. So if you don't know what to read this year so far, you are missing a clear 5-star read. I really recommend you picking The Will of the Many by James Islington. This story, really, when I started it last year, I resented having plans. I clearly remember picking up by this time, just around summer, and it was just so fantastic. Fell in love with this story from the beginning, and I knew right then that it was going to be one of my favorite books of all time. I cannot wait for book 2 to be released at the end of this year, next year perhaps. It's a story that really feels different and that will make you really love fantasy. Cannot recommend more. And if you want to see which were the best but also the worst books that I read this year so far, check out this video. And if you like the content so far, consider joining my Patreon. We have a book of the month, we are doing a Wheel of Time read along, we have reading sprints, game nights, and all in all, it's a very cozy community that I really invite you joining, and hoping you enjoy that. And thank you so much to my Patreons who really support me and my passion, and I cannot be more grateful for you. All names in the description. Thank you so much.